and game FAQs also did. And eventually I got in touch with Matt Turk himself, the master. He's the ultimate MTPO master. And the one thing that was missing from all of these strategies, because all his times were listed, there was one strategy that was missing, and it was Piston Honda 1. If you go on to Game FAQ,
Piston Honda is the champion of the minor circuit and is the first real challenge for a punch-out newbie looking to win their first title. For any seasoned player, this guy is a complete pushover. His guard is incredibly slow and he telegraphs his punches. However, unbeknownst to many, he has by far the most complicated pattern in the game, which has made speedrunning this fight one of the most difficult challenges in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Let's take a dive into the world record history of Piston Honda 1. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, top players were most definitely aware of Honda 1's 3 greatest weaknesses. As I mentioned before, he has an incredibly slow guard, and couple that with his second weakness, only giving up guaranteed stars, and you have the framework for every opening, a guard raised followed by 3 left gut punches. His third weakness becomes apparent right after you score the first knockdown. If you are still at full health, which would be no problem for a top player, Honda would get up on a 1 count, and a single star punch would immediately send him back to the canvas. This meant it was wise to always have at least 1 star in the bank when knocking Honda down for the first time. Even with this knowledge, the earliest players were struggling to piece together a strategy that was capable of beating Piston Honda in under 50 seconds. It was Martin Charlebois who invented the first ever sub 50 second strategy, and it went something like this. Open with 3 left gut punches and then buffer all 3 star punches back to back to back. Then re-raise Honda's guard and land 3 more left gut punches. This requires a long enough delay from Honda so he doesn't interrupt. After that, you need him to attack right away, dodge and stun 4 times and star punch for the knockdown. Phase 2 is inconsequential, as Honda gets up on a 1 count and a single star punch will knock him back down. When Honda gets up for the second time, he has a random refill, and the smaller one occurs only 3/8 of the time. Similar to phase 1, Honda's guard is raised, but only 2 gut punches are landed before the trio of star punches, which does just enough damage to score the final knockdown. Martin probably held the first ever sub 50 world record for Piston Honda 1, but we aren't quite sure of his best time. What you just saw was a recreation of a fight by Sean Zaffron, which occurred sometime before December of 2002. Sean was able to get a time of 49 seconds flat, and is credited for holding the first world record on Piston Honda 1. What you may have noticed from Sean's fight was how different star punches deal different amounts of damage, specifically in phase 1 and 3. If you take a look at the very first star punch, Honda's health bar moves from here to here, which is 20 points of damage. This star punch deals so much damage because it lands into the earliest moments of Honda wiggling his eyebrows. Conversely, the second star punch lands into Honda's wiggling eyebrows late, and this only deals 12 damage. It gets even worse when the third star lands. This hook that Honda does 75% of the time causes the third star punch to deal a pitifully low 8 damage, which is the least amount a star punch does anywhere in the game. However, the other 25% of the time, Honda doesn't hook. In fact, he just stands completely still. A few months later, it was Matt Turk who capitalized on this and invented his first ever world record strategy, the TKO to Tokyo. Matt Turk's first ever world record caliber strategy was really just a small upgrade to what Martin had already found. Instead of Honda performing a hook during your third star punch, he can stand still 25% of the time and allow the star punch to deal 13 damage instead of 8. This allowed Turk to reduce the amount of stun punches needed to make up the damage before securing the first knockdown, saving a little bit of time. There was a big drawback though. Not only were you relying on the no hook, you needed an even longer delay afterwards to land your 3 left gut punches, reducing the odds even further. Using the TKO to Tokyo, Turk was able to just edge under Sean Zaffron's world record, getting a time of 48.97. Truth be told, with extremely good execution and getting the perfect delay after the third star punch, a time under 47 seconds could be achieved. And that's what Turk went for next. Grinding for this better luck, he was able to bring the time down to 46.97 in late May or early June of 2003. It wasn't long before the TKO to Tokyo was brought to its potential. Turk sought to improve the strategy even further, this time altering the end of the fight to save even more time. No less than a week after his 46.97, he had his answer. Eyebrow attitude. Turk completely busted open Piston Honda with his new find. He noticed that on some of his attempts, Piston Honda's guard was up when he returned for Phase 2. The reason for this was because at the end of Phase 1, Honda's guard is raised so the triple left gut punches can be landed. If Honda didn't delay for very long, he wouldn't have time to lower his guard and it would be up for the start of Phase 2. In other words, when his Phase 1s had the better luck, he could go for this new strategy. So, with Honda's guard up for Phase 2, instead of immediately knocking Honda back down with a star punch, Turk would buffer a left gut punch which had just under a 25% chance to land, as Honda is in the process of lowering his guard. Now Turk had 2 stars for the opening of Phase 3. Once again, the low fill is required here, which is 48 health, and for future reference, it's always required. Turk launched both his star punches immediately, the first dealing 13 damage and the second landing into eyebrows early, dealing the maximum, 20. Then Turk delayed a couple of frames and intercepted the second eyebrows with a face punch, getting the final star needed to complete the strat. At this point, Honda is at 10 health. Turk needs another 1 in 4 to go his way, a no hook from Honda. Eyebrow attitude was in full effect, and the end of the fight reordering was enough to bring the world record time down to 46.25. The Piston Honda 1 IL was becoming more and more demanding on favourable RNG events to go the player's way. Turk's use of the 1 in 4 random gutter to open Phase 2 was a game changer. With the right setup, this sort of punch could theoretically be used in different places or even multiple times throughout the fight, but the likelihood of pulling off such a strategy would become exponentially worse. Turk would lower the world record again in October of 2004 to a 46 flat using eyebrow attitude. As I look back on this strategy now, there was a very simple tweak that could save a decent chunk of time. If we take a look at the original strat, we could see Honda's health go from 22 to 19 before being taken out with our star punch. The opening of Phase 1 could have been altered by including 2 right gut punches, which would take 2 extra damage from Honda, and then we could cut out an entire stun punch right before the star punch. This easily saves just over half a second, and it was known that the right gut punch did more damage than the left. Why this wasn't used is unknown. Just after Turk's improvement to 46 flat, the first ever TAS was published by Phil and Janisto. Remember how I mentioned there was the potential to see more random punches being inserted into the fight to lower the time? Well, this first TAS brings it to light, and it's a horror show. Since Honda's guard starts in the down position, the TAS opens with 4 face punches, which are also just under 25% likely each. The first star punch lands for 20 damage as usual, but the second lands for 16 damage instead of 12. By delaying the star punch by 4 frames, it now hits a new window, which is precisely when Honda begins to jab. As the rest of the fight goes on, we see more and more of these random face punches. I went through and did a rough calculation. The odds of hitting this strategy were 1 in nearly 300 million, and the final time was 42.82 seconds. Just about everything in this task is completely unusable for a human. It would be like banging your head against a wall, then taking 2 minutes to get back to the start of the fight to try again, and repeat. The only beneficial strat was to sacrifice those 4 frames to land the star punch for 16 damage, and this still sees use in many strategies today. And then, the world record was beaten by someone else. Some may believe that Turk went and snagged up all of his world records when he was the only person playing the game, and then he was subsequently beaten long after he retired. That is not entirely true though. In the early months of 2005, Adelacut was able to contest for the Honda 1 world record time and was one of the first players to give Matt some much needed competition. Matt and Adelacut would duke it out for the Honda 1 world record, going back and forth, inventing new strats, optimizing, and squeezing every corpuscle of time out of them as they could. On the 14th of June 2005, Adelacut would set an incredible world record time of 43.97 seconds, taking the world record from Turk and solidifying himself as the Piston Honda 1 champion. But as you know, Matt Turk does Matt Turk things. 3 months later, he obliterates the Honda 1 world record, getting a time not just a little lower than Adelicut's. He beats it by an entire second, setting a new world record time of 42.97. Half a decade went by before Sinister One decided that he would speedrun Mike Tyson's Punch-Out himself, and to start learning all the best strats, he searched old message boards on game FAQs and read Tom's Punch-Out page. He very quickly learnt that Matt Turk was the undisputed best player at Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and held all the world records. Luckily for Sinister, Matt had even written out detailed strategies for how he achieved all of his best times, all except for Piston Honda 1. So he got into contact with Turk and asked about it.
So I asked him about it. I said, hey, I'm really interested in this 42.97. How the heck did you get that time on Piston Honda? Because I was struggling to get sub 50 at the time. And he kind of he was like kind of bobbing and weaving and going back and forth. And he was like, yeah, I got to try it out again. I got to test it on console, and I got to do this and I got to do that. And essentially, he didn't want to tell me. He didn't want to tell me what it was. And I was like, all right, you know what? Fair enough. Because eventually he came out, I was getting kind of annoyed with him that he kept kind of dipping and dodging around this. And, eventually he just said, look, I worked really hard on that strat, and there's some things, that you shouldn't give away for free. And once he told me that, I was fine, man. I was like, you know what? Hey, I respect you, dude. And that was actually a huge turning point for me in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, because what I had to do is I had to recruit other help, because to that point, Matt Turk was really the only old school Mike Tyson's Punch-Out community member that I had any kind of contact with. And I got in touch with Adelicat, the guy that had...
Since the olden days, Adelicat had made a completely new TAS, which brought the theoretical best time for Honda down to 40.25, and now Sinister had enlisted his help in order to figure out how in the world Turk managed to get his time.
So we kind of started working out, how do we get a 42? And we figured it out. We went through all the motions, and he did, some TASing and figured out how Turk would have gotten the 42 realistically. And let's just put it this way, it's goddamn impossible. All right, if I was going to go for a 42 that way, I would go insane, because the luck you need is well beyond.
So they worked out how Turk did it, but could they beat him? Turk's strategy was insanely tricky, and it was executed extremely well. They needed something that was less random, but also faster. Was that even possible? Well, Sinister figured out a way. He was testing some potential strategies for the full game run, and was thinking about what if he had more stars for Phase 3. And it turned out, if he got the good refill, Phase 3 could be insanely quick. If Phase 3 could be that fast, then he could give up a certain amount of time in Phase 1 to ensure he ended that phase with 3 stars. Sinister shared the strategy with Adelicat, and a theory TAS was made. A 42.25. But this was a demonstration of what absolute perfect execution of the new strat could achieve. Even though this was the best shot Sinister had at taking down Turk's Honda 1 world record, Sinister decided the luck was still too dubious to go for. Until McHazard came along. One of the biggest discoveries McHazard found when he tasked the game was how to do a guard manipulated max damage star punch on Piston Honda. There's a few different versions of it, but the easiest one requires 2 things. Honda's guard to initially be in the up position, and to have an extended period of time when Honda is standing completely still. There was only one spot in the fight where both of these things could be guaranteed, and that was at the start of Phase 3. McHazard took a look at Sinister's strat and upgraded it. On just his 3rd attempt, Sinister set a new world record. This is how it went. He opened the fight with 3 right gut punches. This needs to be done extremely tightly. You only have 3 frames, otherwise this star punch won't deal the maximum 20 damage. He then delayed 4 frames, so this Star Punch deals 16 damage, and then held up to raise Honda's guard before the 75% hook, countered once for 5 damage, and landed a Star Punch while Honda is stunned, dealing another 20. This is where Mikazad's upgrade begins. With Honda's guard up, Sinister landed one of those random gut punches, and then delayed a fraction of a second to allow Honda's guard to drop. With good enough luck, Honda can stand still for long enough to allow 3 face punches to land, knocking him down with 3 stars in the bank. Phase 2, as always, is a 1 count. However, because of the exact way Phase 1 ended, up and start can be buffered and Honda's guard will rise and be up for the start of Phase 3. Now for the max damage Star Punch. With Honda's guard up, Sinister delays a few frames to allow the guard to drop and Star Punches. During the Star Punch, up is tapped, and this causes the Star Punch to deal 20 damage instead of 13. To add to the extra damage, you can even buffer a free face jab directly afterwards, and Honda can't even block. As long as you got the low refill, 2 more buffered Star Punches would be enough to seal the deal, and Sinister finished the fight matching his original theory TAS of the first sub-Turk strat, 42.25, and Turk's record, which had stood for nearly 9 years, was beaten. So where could the record go from here? Well, on the 4th of March 2015, Zalad1 pulled off the exact same strategy and tied Sinister's world record. The theoretical low was a 41.97, so with near perfect execution, the 42-second barrier could be broken. The question was anyone going to be able to play well enough to do it? Perhaps, but an improvement to the strategy was going to be made first. On July 2nd, just a few months after the world record was tied, it was once again broken. Brandon De Silva is a punch-out individual level specialist. He isn't concerned at all with full game runs, and just focuses on one fight at a time. De Silva's upgrade was extremely simple. The entirety of Phase 1, which you just saw, was exactly the same, and so was Phase 2. Phase 3 was the thing that changed. Incredibly, he actually removed Mikazad's guard manipped max damage Star Punch. Instead, he opened Phase 3 with another random gut punch, and then simply fired all 3 Star Punches one after the other without delaying. This saved 4 frames over Mikazad's strategy, which required you to wait a fraction of a second to allow Honda's guard to drop at the start of the phase. Brandon's execution was tight enough throughout the fight, and he was able to get a final time of 41.99 seconds. If he had lost one more frame, sub 42 would not have been achieved. Brandon himself said he would improve this time, and that is exactly what he did. Less than a month later, he pulled it off again, getting a final time of 41.97 seconds. With that 4 frame time save, the theoretical limit for this strat was a 41.82. Brandon was able to get so close to this limit because of 2 things. First and most obviously, he's extremely good at the game. And secondly, Phase 3 was entirely buffered. There were simply less spots in the strategy where a player could lose time. The upgrade did have one drawback though. That 4 frame time save required him to hit a second random gut punch, which decreased the odds by a factor of 4. Was this what the Honda 1 world record was going to come to? Who is crazy enough to go for the most random punches? And then I showed up. I was trying to figure out if there was a way to land one of Mikazad's max damage stars in Phase 1 of the fight, and ultimately make an improvement to the full game speedrun strategy. What I found was the opposite. A pretty unreliable strategy that was blisteringly fast. The first 4 punches remain the same. Triple right gut punches and a Star Punch for 20 damage. Now things change. Instead of delaying 4 frames and landing a Star Punch for 16 damage, I delay 2 frames and land a regular face punch, bringing me back to 3 stars. I then hold up to raise Honda's guard and wait for the 75% hook, counter 3 times and Star Punch. This is where the guard manip max damage Star Punch comes in. I wait 5 frames for Honda's guard to drop and Star Punch, and during the Star Punch I tap up, making it max damage. Honda is now at 5 health remaining, and if you remember, right after one of these max damage punches, you can land a free face punch, knocking Honda down in 25 seconds. My strat took the opposite approach to Sinister and Mikazad. They loaded up on stars before the end of Phase 1 so they could make Phase 3 faster. My strat would go into Phase 3 with 0 stars and use the old single segment Phase 3, triple left gut punch and 2 Star Punches. Nevertheless, While Phase 3 was very slow, the lead my Phase 1 gave pushed the potential down to a 41.61. My Phase 1 did have its drawbacks. I've shown this diagram before, which shows the complexity of Honda 1's pattern, but that's not the full story. This flowchart includes all the delays Honda can do. For the end of the phase to work, you need Honda to not attack in this section of his pattern. It looks kinda bad, but I estimate the odds to be somewhere between 20 and 30% likely. Although Phase 1 saved a lot of time, having 0 stars for Phase 3 meant losing almost all of it back, and with the difficulty of execution, my improvement alone just wasn't going to cut it. All was not lost though, because someone was about to save my strat. Within what felt like a few minutes of Salt messing around with my Phase 1 and seeing how close it was to being world record caliber, he came up with a way to make Phase 3 faster. On August 9th, 2017, it wasn't Summoning Salt or I who got the next world record, it was Zalad1. The original Phase 3 picked up 3 stars, but then only used 2 star punches. Zalad used the new strategy, getting only 2 stars, then using both star punches. With Honda 1 hit away from knockdown, he needed a 25% no hook from Honda and hit the delayed face punch. The Honda world record now sat at a 41.25. Sub 40 seconds was only a stone throws away. This world record was becoming extremely optimized, and creative breakthrough for new strategies was waning. With nothing new on the table, guess what? It was time to reintroduce the random gut punch. But this gut punch was not like the others, which had odds of about 1 in 4. Oh no. This punch was 1 in 16. At the very end of the fight, Zalad required Honda to not hook and landed a delayed face punch. Luckwise, this is 1 in 4. What if we also changed our punch to a random gutter? Well, Honda only lets those through a quarter of the time, but he will never let it through if he tries to hook. So at the end of the fight, a 1 in 16 punch had to be landed. Wanting his world record back, Brandon De Silva grinded out the fight, and on August 26, 2018, he finally got that last punch to land and became the first person to go under 41 seconds on Piston Honda 1.
Got it! World record! World record, baby! Woo! I got it. Oh, guys, Piston Honda 2! Yeah!
Brandon's fight was very good, but it was beatable. Using the gut punch brought the potential time down to 40.25 seconds, saving about half a second compared to the face punch. Over a year and a half later, someone new would rise and take the record.
Yes, me.
All I wanted to do was pull off my own Phase 1 in my personal best. Up until April of 2020, I had never even attempted to grind out a top level Piston Honda 1 time, and my personal best was just whatever my best fight was in full game runs. When I finally completed my fight, I was astounded. A 40.48, just one increment behind what was possible. Piston Honda 1 was so close to its limit. My Phase 1 combined with Summoning Salt's Phase 3 had created the ultimate Piston Honda 1 strategy. Just to be clear, it wasn't anywhere close to the actual task time, which was a 36.97, but the odds to hit that are about 1 in 42 million, and there is very little room for error. Our strategy had odds of only about 1 in 150. Even if someone wanted to take more risk, there wasn't anywhere to land another random punch. We were so close to getting sub 40, but it seemed that we would all have to accept that I was the best at Piston Honda 1. And then Nolan came along. What Nolan did to take the record from me was nothing short of jaw-dropping. Pure insanity. I mentioned a minute ago there wasn't anywhere else to land a random punch to save a few frames. Well, how about 3 random punches? At the start of the fight, instead of spending a few frames to raise Honda's guard and landing 3 right gut punches, Nolan just buffered 3 face punches back to back to back. It wasn't possible to land only 1 or 2 here, as you would then need to spend time to raise Honda's guard to get the 3rd star. The odds of hitting 3 consecutive face jabs like this are about 1 in 67. On top of everything else in the fight, that makes the strategy 1 in 10,000. But Nolan didn't have to perform nearly that many attempts to get this fight. On just his 154th attempt, he won the lottery, and clutched out the only sub 40 Piston Honda 1 fight. And that is where the record sits today.